Hello, NHIO. It's the web shop you need to know.
The web shop everybody needs to know. NHIO, it's the web shop.
Web shop you need to know. Tools, decals, files, and much more. Tools and decals, files, and much more. So don't lose time and visit the store. Visit the store. NHIO, NHIO.
NHIO.
Spend $50 or if you like even more to enjoy free shipping, free gift of your choice. To enjoy free shipping and free gift of your choice.
Free gift of your choice. NHIO, NHIO, NHIO.
Welcome to the Model Philosopher Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Meddings. Some months ago now, you may remember an episode I had where Barry Biediger and Marijn van Giels interviewed each other for the show. This was something different I was trying, of taking the host of the podcast out, handing over to two guests to interview each other on a topic. I've decided to return to that format this week, and this time it's with Milner and Mikkel Frederiksen, and they'll be talking about originality. But before this episode's discussion, I'd like to talk to you about our sponsor, Scale Model Challenge. Scale Model Challenge is possibly the best model show you can go to right now. It takes place this year on the 18th and 19th of October, just outside Eindhoven in the Netherlands. Scale Model Challenge is a feast for modelers, from fantasy painters to historical modelers, aircraft modelers, armour modelers, diorama makers, and every other kind of modeler. People come from as far as Thailand, Singapore, Japan, Canada, the US, and South America to attend the show, and you will find everyone there from famous names in the hobby to beginners, all sharing their love of model making with a world-class competition, trade stands, club stands, workshops, and probably my favourite bar at any model show anywhere. On the 28th of April this year, you'll be able to buy tickets for the show. You can also book a space on the workshops and grab the latest very cool t-shirt and mug merch from Scale Model Challenge. This year's workshops have been announced and include Peter Usher, Fabrizio Russo, Anna Machowska, Simon Sikora, Mark Musclans, Alessandro Natale, Aurélie Schick, Mamikon, Michael Shemechko, Francesco Farabi, and Helen Borsch. Workshops like the hotel rooms book up really fast, so head on over to scalemodelchallenge.com now and make sure you get your merch, your tickets, and your hotel rooms booked. While I'm here, I'd also like to thank Anish, who we heard from at the very top of the show. Tom has a bunch of new 3D stuff, and I just got a new pair of his superb precision tweezers, plus a set of the new angle precision tweezers. These tools are, in my opinion, the best tweezers I have ever bought, and I can't recommend them enough. So head on over to anish.io today and get yourself a pair or two of those. Also thanks to new sponsor Hypersonic Models. Here's Jeffrey from Hypersonic now.
Hello, Jeffrey from Hypersonic Models here, sponsor of this fine podcast. If aircraft from the Cold War era are your thing, you build 48 scale models and you're looking for that extra detail, improve accuracy, or want to build that special variant, come and have a look at what's available from Hypersonic Models. 3D printed and cast resin and even injection molded sets as well as decals. Particularly well served are aircraft like the F-4 Phantom or F-104 Starfighter, all available in my shop at hypersonicmodels.com, shipping directly from Japan at very reasonable rates, or buy from one of my partner shops from around the world. That's all from me.
Okay, over to Fett and Mikkel. I love both their work for its inventiveness, vibrancy, and how different it is to the other things on the table. Frequently featuring humour or approaching a subject from a completely different angle, they always come up with something worth looking at and something different to anything else you might see at a competition. So I asked someone to talk about making something original and thinking about the hobby in original and unusual ways. Let's hear them do that now. Welcome to the Model Philosopher, Fett Milner.
Hello again.
And Mikkel Frederiksen.
Hi.
All right, now we're here to talk about originality, and I think you've got a few questions for each other, so I'm just going to sit back and let you two talk, and I hope the audience enjoys this one.
So, Mikkel, one of the things that I always find kind of interesting is that I had a eureka moment when I sort of decided to stop just doing the same stuff I always used to do, which for me was probably my still life. Did you have a eureka moment, a project that made you go, there's something else here?
Yeah, I think I haven't been painting for that long. I think I started in the summer of 2021. And there was like a couple of years where I was just learning the basic stuff. But I'm always kind of drawn to original stuff, weird things, and stuff I haven't seen anything like before. And the more I painted, I think the more I got drawn into doing stuff that felt a little more like my own and something that I hadn't seen others do. I don't know if there was a eureka moment. It's probably more like a steady downward slope into doing weird stuff. So I think at some point I had to plug up the courage and do something different, and I think that was going to Dogma 48 in 2023. I think I did something like a satanic ATM machine.
I think I remember that one.
That's kind of a starting point for that, where I did something other than just trying to paint as perfect as I could.
Yeah, the Danish community has like an amazing sort of boiler for creative work, like especially coming out of Dogma. There's so much interesting stuff that comes out of that. Do you have a lot of contact with other Danes? I don't know if do you live in Copenhagen? Or?
No, I don't. I live about as far away from Copenhagen as I can. I'm on the other side of the country, so it's a 3-hour drive at least. So I don't get to go there very often. Maybe once a year or something like that. Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then I started going to SMC in Holland and see a lot of stuff. And then I got just turned on to doing all kinds of other stuff because there was so much cool stuff going down there.
Yeah. No, the SMC's had a bit of an expansion and sort of creativity, I guess I'd say, over the last couple of years. There's been much more interesting things sort of turning up. I guess moving maybe further away from its scale modeling, strictly historical sort of background.
Yeah, definitely. The first time I went, I really enjoyed seeing stuff that I had seen online and some of the people that I really admire, some of their work. Jamie Foster from this one.
Yeah.
I had a long talk with him the last 2 times I went, and that's been very inspirational, I think.
Yeah. No, Jamie paints like no one else. It's really interesting stuff. I mean, I see a lot of the influence of his work in yours.
Yeah, he has been a big inspiration for me. He's like a very unique way of painting, so I had to try that out in some way. Yeah. And it's just nice to see all the diversity there because there's so much different stuff. That's kind of fascinating. I was really mind blown the first year coming home from that, and there's so much you don't see. So you have to go look for it on the next time around.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
always more to see at SMC. I find, there's always just something kind of hidden away. When we go to SMC, me and my friends, because we run the Fen Model Show, we're giving out core prizes, which are special trophies for especially awesome things. And because we don't give them to things that are necessarily technically well painted, we give them to highly creative and original pieces. We kind of have to discover them because they're often like quite small or hidden away, or they're understated. And so we sort of put a lot of effort into trying to make sure we see all of the crazy stuff people come up with, which is nice to see, because it's a big competition that I think a lot of people take very, very seriously. So I think sometimes that makes people play a bit safer. They want to enter something competitive rather than something interesting necessarily.
I remember that prize going to Gabby in the first year that I went to SMCs with the fashion animals.
Yeah,
it was like a fantastic project that I really
it was
loved.
amazing. Yeah, we pretty much decided that one was getting a core prize on the way to the show, like because it popped up on Instagram. I was like, guys, you have to see this. This is incredible. But that's probably one of the exceptions for the core prize, isn't that it was recognised, but for got a gold medal I think that year, and everywhere she's taken them, they've done really, really well.
So, but we're here to talk about originality in miniature painting and model making and whatever we call it. And I don't know, when I go to SMC, I think there's a lot of very similar stuff going on. Maybe I'm not looking close enough, but when you look down all these long shelves of models, some of them I think look kind of the same. So, and all the tanks are green and stuff, and some things drown in that landscape for me. But I think we need to talk about why originality is even important in something like this. Because it's just a basic stupid question that I think is kind of important.
Yeah. I mean, because I guess it's clearly not that important for a lot of people. I mean, a lot of people are perfectly happy they'll get a kit, they'll open it up, they'll assemble it, they'll do an incredible job of assembling it, they'll add aftermarket parts, but it's all still very clearly, this is a whatever tank, or this is this soldier with this webbing, or whatever it is, this is a dwarf from this clan in Warhammer or whatever. Where I guess maybe this for them is kind of their creative process, and that originality isn't an important part of that creative process for them. But obviously for some of us, the originality is, it's kind of the point, isn't it?
Exactly.
I tell people sometimes that, I could paint that model, but if I painted it, anyone else could also have painted it. So what's so special about it? What makes it mine? Which is why I tend to, do everything kind of custom in some degree.
I agree completely. That's a big part of it for me. I need something to identify with in the work I do. So I'm drawn to all the I don't know what kind of stuff. I don't know if there's a common denominator, but it has to project something or be relatable or something that I can identify with in some way. And maybe that makes work more original, maybe because it symbolizes something that's important just for me. And I'll imagine that it's kind of like that for you as well. You have to put some meaning into whatever you're doing, and then it's not just the model painted, but it's there has to be something else to it.
Yeah. I mean, I think your recent piece, The Cupboard, is kind of like a remarkable demonstration of that, because it's just a cupboard. People have painted cupboards before. They've usually as part of a diorama or whatever, but you've left it bare. It's just a cupboard on a base, and there's nothing else there except light and color. And you've done such a magnificent job. I mean, I love that piece because, to me, it's sort of like cupboards are, when you're a kid, they're simultaneously magical and terrifying. They're a great place for hide and seek. There's a doorway to Narnia, and then when the lights go out, it's where the monster lives, and it's terrifying. You see something rustling inside, and you just crap yourself. And I mean, being able to take something that's kind of banal as a piece of furniture, and just paint it and present it as something, like almost like what was its name? Duchamp's fountain.
Exactly.
The urinal just turned upside down. He's taken something perfectly ordinary and gone, look at this in a slightly different way. Obviously, his is slightly more crass than yours.
Yeah.
But
But it's a perfectly unoriginal way of making a piece of art, just some kind of object that's being that's on exhibit somewhere. And I think it's not so common in model making or miniatures, because there's always a person or a monster or something. And I think I'd like to see some more of that kind of stuff with just maybe just objects or something. I've always been drawn to art that's without people in it. For some reason, I think there's more space for me in there if there's no if there's not an orc shouting in my face or something like that.
Yeah.
Maybe that leaving some space for the viewer is kind of an important thing, and maybe I don't know if that's original. It's not in like a broad visual arts content. No, what's the word? Context is the word. Because there's just so much variety in visual arts today. But when it's in a miniature show, I think it sticks out in some way. So I guess you could call it original if it's not in the broader artistic sense.
Yeah. I mean, the hobby is still very much kind of very close to its roots, from military modeling and wargaming. I mean, I very rarely paint model soldiers anymore, as it were. Military topics, I very rarely paint them anymore. I'm always looking for civilian pieces, and thank God I discovered that there are some decent model railway miniature makers now, because if you look at your traditional model suppliers, they don't have civilians unless they're World War II German civilians or models like that, where it's like, well, I don't want someone from the 1930s or 40s. I'd like a modern person with headphones and
exactly, like a slightly overweight white guy in Crocs or something.
Exactly. So on that topic, do you find yourself, when you're creating something, do you have the concept clear in your head, or does it bounce around? Do you start with a model or with a concept, or?
I think it's different from one project to the other, but the last few ones I've done have been that I have scratch built everything, so there's not been a model for that, but it's just me thinking about an object and then trying to represent that in some way. But it's I am a very visual thinker, so I get this image in my head about something, and then I put it into my sketchbook, and I go and think about it for a couple of days or a couple of weeks, depending on how long time it takes for an idea to mature. But it takes some time, and there's some back and forth in how do I represent this as a miniature or as a sculpture or whatever you want to call it. And I have to do some thinking about composition, and is there anything that I could take away to make it more simple. I like to pare things down to the bare minimum, and that takes some time, I think, because when an idea is new, it's always kind of complicated, and you want to tell all this story stuff, and you load a lot of crap onto it to make it more readable or something, but then you have to dial it back and remove stuff, so you're left with the essence of what you want to say, I think.
That's interesting. My process is almost exactly the reverse. My projects start very simple, and if I spend too long thinking about them, they become too complicated. and I add more details and so on. And so I like to work very fast. I have an idea very quickly and then need to do it fast, which helped with the chairs I did. I knocked those out at record speed. And you can see they're very simple. It's a chair and a person and then maybe something on the base, and that's it. But essentially, we both have reached the same conclusion, which is to simplicity and paring it back.
Yeah, and I think
are we really original?
I don't think we're very original. I think we can be original in the context of miniature shows, but I think I studied art at the Academy of Fine Arts in Denmark for a few years, but I didn't finish that education. But I was very exposed to contemporary art for a couple of years, and that was really fascinating. So I think if I look at miniature making and miniature painting in relation to what I've seen in galleries and art museums in around the world, I think we are not very original, and there's just so much we could do different, or so many other things that we could try out. And I think we just have to like plug off the courage to do some crazy stuff. I want to see that. I know, just bring it on. I think.
Yeah. I think we probably find that model shows, that because the main forum for presenting our work is model shows, which are typically competitive rather than exhibitionary. Kind of because of the judging criteria and all of that, I find that that this limits a lot of things. This kind of dictates to us, this is what the hobby is. This is what you do. And certainly. I think I think I have a bugbear about categories, that I've spoken to many people before. That when you go to a model show, the more categories they have, the more limiting it is. Because it defines everything down to very small sections, and it leaves these gaps. And then you end up with places with your model shows. You're like, well, I can't take half my models because they don't fit anywhere. There's nowhere for them. And I think when we keep restricting ourselves by going to these model shows and only presenting stuff there, and we're always thinking about that sort of competitive aspect, that I'm kind of losing my train of thought here.
But I think I know where you're going with it, because I think those judging criteria will end up shaping how people work and what they choose to bring to the show. And that's kind of a shame, because I think I'd like just anyone's own perspective on any given project. It shouldn't be judged, or it shouldn't be shaped by the idea of what you need to provide to win a gold medal. I just really want to see what you want to express with something. That I think that would be way more interesting.
Yeah. I mean, art manages to run competitive shows even today. It's moved on from the days of the salon in France, but they still exist, and I think there's probably things that the hobby can learn from how they run theirs to encourage sort of a greater degree of originality, more creative approaches, novel approaches to how we apply paint to these things.
There's certainly a lot of variety in those shows, I think, compared to miniature shows. Within some technical restraints, of course, because you have to be able to represent it and bring it to whatever gallery is running this exhibition. But there's a lot of norms in miniature art or miniature painting that we may not be too aware of, and I think we can deviate from that if we learn to identify those kinds of things.
Yeah, I think there's limitations I've found because it is, miniatures are necessarily representational. They represent physical things, whether or not they're real things, dragons and whatnot. But we are endeavoring to present something as, generally speaking, in realistic terms. We can't go for a complete abstract expressionist approach, or rather, We might be able to. I've just never been able to figure that out. I have thought
No,
about
me
it.
neither. But
Yeah.
I'm thinking about it
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I've been thinking about, can you make a like abstract sculpture in miniature form, but scale
Well,
makes no sense in
yeah,
that
I mean, I've got a
respect. So
friend who's working
why
on
not?
some ideas,
Mm,
and I've seen some interesting, people have done some digital
mm,
sculpts that are sort of
yeah,
interesting, but they're
mm,
still representational.
yeah,
They're still broadly speaking representational.
yeah,
Like, I mean, I've got an idea to do a cubist bull,
yeah.
and I'll present it next to a miniature bull as well. So there's the two together, like Picasso's bulls.
Mm,
So because I'm interested to see, how well that translates and whether or not I can even do it, because I hate sculpting, but I'll have to
yeah.
sculpt this cubist thing.
Yeah. But when it's more artistic, there's no. I think
You
there's
can be
more
sloppier.
license to. Yeah, you
Yeah.
can be more sloppy. It just needs to be good enough for the idea to get across. So as long as it's not ugly, I think you're.
Yeah, that's the challenge. Yeah,
Yeah, but that's the hard part, and I think that it's the interesting part of doing this kind of work is solving those challenges, because you can have all sort of crazy ideas, but you have to make them
yeah,
work in some way, and yeah, your quest for originality gets challenged a bit
yeah,
sometimes, I think.
yeah. Well, it's part of the puzzle, isn't it? Yeah,
Exactly, yeah. But I've been thinking too, like, is there a, if you want to be really original, I think you need to kind of think about what's the quality of miniature painting. Is there some kind of unique quality that you can play upon with a
mm,
piece? And it's not something I have an answer for myself, but I think it's interesting to think about if there's
yeah.
anything, any certain strengths or something that you can
Well, I've
draw
been,
upon.
yeah, I mean, I've been considering miniature art or miniature painting as essentially a form of collage. Um,
Yeah.
Largely because, for the most part, the models are pre-made in some
Mm.
degree or another, and there's a whole bunch of artists who do really interesting stuff with collage. There's an Australian sculptor, Patricia Biondi, who does work with concrete and wood and
Mm.
cardboard and stuff, and she builds these
Yeah.
structures using layers of materials and then paints them sort of one flat primary color, like yellow or
Hmm.
red or whatever. Um, and sometimes they're purely design, I guess you'd say, where they're kind of like fan-shaped structures. They're non-representational. But other times she creates these things, and I keep looking at them and going, that if I could figure out how to do what she just did, that looks
Hmm.
like a cyberpunk setting. And you just add a
Yeah.
figure to it, and the
Mm.
context, the figure provides enough context for you to go, wow, that's a sci-fi setting, or cyberpunk setting. Or there's another one that looks like a torii gate, from Japan.
Mm.
You put a samurai there. And so I was kind of interested in seeing sort of how far you can take this sort of collage idea before it
Mm.
kind of breaks down and stops being miniature painting,
Yeah.
as it were, if there is kind of some sort of point where that happens, or where it just becomes sort of, what's the word? I guess inoperably uh, non-representational.
Yeah.
So it stops making sense.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think yeah, I'm not a big fan of thinking about the restraints and stuff. I'm generally
Mm.
like I believe that things can be done, but
Yeah.
optimistic in that regard. But yeah, I think a lot of stuff that you see in like installation pieces in contemporary art, you could probably do something like that, but it'll
Mm.
just be in miniature scale, and it will be in a very small and defined space.
Yeah.
But the thoughts about composition in those kinds of art pieces, I think you can transfer some of that to miniature making, because it's a 3D collage sculpture type thing, but it's just really small.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So you can't be within it like you can be in a big installation piece.
Sure. I mean, I guess that's something not many people have done anything with true scale. You know,
Mm,
I can't think of anything like, people go on about, Roman's big zombie diorama with,
yeah.
however many hundreds of zombies and stuff, but it's still very small. As a
Mm,
physical object, it's still very small. I don't think I've ever seen
yeah.
anyone do something that's actually monumental, but
No.
with miniatures.
I think there's a couple of I think American artists called the Chapman brothers. They did some
Oh yeah,
quite large diorama with the McDonald's clowns
yeah,
getting crucified and stuff.
yeah. Dino
That's
and
kind of those were
Dino and
big.
Georgios. Yeah, yeah, I remember them. Yeah, no, those were fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean there was the famous Gallipoli diorama that Peter Jackson had made in New Zealand, which was vast. It was to scale. It was absolutely enormous.
Yeah.
But again, it's I mean that's less. I guess it's extremely representational. That's depicting a specific battle. Yeah,
and I think maybe some of the restraints that you face as a miniature artist, they're from the fact that you put everything on a plinth and you put it in a miniature show. So could you in any way change the way you exhibit your pieces? I've been thinking about like miniature street art or something. Could you do that?
I mean that's already a thing in some places. They do the fairy doors, so it's kind of an extension of that, really, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
We have those in Denmark too.
Oh right, yeah.
Yeah, but I thought about it when I saw you made this piece with a graffiti artist.
Oh yes,
and of course you put it on a plinth with a backdrop. But before that you posted a picture of it on your thumb.
Yes.
And I thought that was kind of an interesting thing because it put the miniature in the real world rather than in some kind of constructed
down,
space.
Yeah.
So if you meet a miniature out in the street, you may feel yourself in another relation to it than if you see it in a show on a shelf.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of interesting in a way.
Yeah, maybe I should go down to the local cathedral and sneak some some miniature graffiti artists in there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's something I've been thinking about. I've made a piece with a lot of signs, and a guy looking at signs a couple of years ago. Yeah, and I've been thinking about those signs. They would probably go well in the street environment. So I've actually painted a few that I'm thinking about putting out there. But it'll be for a very small number of people who actually go exploring and find this stuff. But I think those people may have a more interesting experience with this piece than if I just post it on Instagram or something. It may be just you discovering this in some space.
Yeah, I mean, especially if they have no previous experience of miniatures, for instance, they're going to have an entirely different understanding or sort of emotional connection to it because they don't look at it and go, "Oh, I remember seeing that at a model show," or "Oh, that'd look great on a plinth."
Yeah, exactly.
They'll see it as something else entirely. There's kind of that kind of sense of wonder, maybe.
Exactly, and I think you have, if you do that kind of thing, you have to like force yourself to think about what's relevant to these people walking the streets, or you can't just write some orc or space marine stuff on the sign. It has to be relevant to or interesting even to some random person walking down the street.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting idea, moving the hobby out of its Anaraki sort of. I don't want to say hovels, but I mean, there's a lot of nerds we smell, so we'll call it hovels. And into more public spaces and sort of encouraging people to think more about that.
We are exhibiting miniature art in a very restrained way, I think, and it would be interesting to see miniature art in other spaces. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah. I mean, there are people who are, I've seen they try to put on art exhibitions about miniatures, and I'm a little jealous because it'd be quite nice to have my stuff in an art gallery. I think that'd be fun.
Yeah, definitely, sure.
But then I look at what they've done, and I'm like, oh, but you've just painted Space Marines. Like that's you've hired out this gallery space. You could do so much more to sort of encourage public engagement with it, and to rather than having it really just look like an extension of, oh, that's that kid's game, isn't it? Or
Yeah, I think you have to really consider your audience in that type of environment, because what are you expressing about yourself with a miniature of a space marine that makes sense to any other person? Like it has to be readable in some way. Yeah, and it's something that I think about a lot, actually. Like, what if I have a hard time sometimes picking up figures to paint, because I think it's hard to find something that represents something to me, or that's meaningful. So yeah, I don't buy a lot of models, but and I have a lot of ideas about stuff that I want to make, but I'm bound by my restraint of sculpting skills.
Yeah. No, I buy a lot of models on the inverse. Largely, they're all 1/72, civilian figures. They're tiny, so they're quite cheap. So it's not a massive cost. But I buy them essentially just on the basis that it's a person doing something that's entirely banal. And I'm like, what? How can I make this banal thing, like looking at a phone, interesting? What can I do with this to create something novel out of it? What stories can I find around that? So,
and I that's what I do too. I think I don't buy a lot of models, but when I do, I think it's because there's something banal to it, and I think that's probably a good quality in a miniature, because it's it makes it relatable, or you can read yourself into it. For the piece I did with all the signs, I got this small figure of a man holding a suitcase. And he was wearing a coat and a hat, and he was clearly traveling or something.
Yeah. Looks like a traveling salesman.
Yeah, and I felt like that was very symbolic, and you could really use that to tell a story. I think I'd like more of those kind of figures.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And in larger scales too.
Yeah. Well, 3D printing is the miracle of modern society. Yeah. Completely changed the hobby for me. Like, opened everything up.
Yeah. Oh, I just really don't want to buy one, but
no, I
should.
thankfully have friends who print.
Yeah.
No, I think the other interesting thing with having very plain banal figures is that it becomes more of a challenge, I think, to make something that's striking and interesting on first glance, to capture the attention of the viewer, because you can't just go, oh, well, he's a dragon, so he's huge, or he's he's got a stick that's on fire, so there's lots of glowy stuff. You naturally kind of have to treat them with, I guess, a more delicate hand, I would say, because they don't have the overblown proportions, they don't have the natural pizzazz. You've got to think, I guess, a bit more about what makes this figure interesting, what makes your story interesting, and how to present that up front.
And that becomes the defining part of that piece you're making, and I think that's really important. About the panache of it, I think I generally tend to like stuff that's very downplayed or minimal. I like stuff that you have to discover in some way, or if it's kind of secret, or so I'm small stuff that's kind of hidden. I really like that. I think that's a great quality to a piece, if there's something to find in it anyway. And I think a good example is actually Chris's piece with the baby trolley from that I saw at SMC last year, because it was in the sea of giant dioramas. And I couldn't really focus on any of them because there were just so many of them, and I just
and all very similar.
Them, it's all these people. Yeah, it's similar colors and kind of the same. But then in that sea of giant dioramas, there was like this little baby trolley, and that really, because it was small and insignificant, I think it really stood out to me. And then it was kind of okay. In between all these tanks, there's this little baby trolley, and so I had to look closer at it, and I said I saw these bullet casings in the grass when I looked really close, and that really struck me because I had to go exploring in the piece, and it was a very intimate experience, I think. And then you see these bullet casings, and it hits you in the head that someone may have killed a child in this piece, and I think that was a very intense moment in some way.
I'll jump in there. It's interesting what you were saying earlier about putting miniatures in a more public space, like out in the street, rather than in a show, because the category at the competition was part of my piece. If you see what I mean, it was made to go in amongst lots of tanks and things. The idea was that it would. We have a habit in ordnance modelling of valorizing military hardware, of glamorizing it, and to put in a sea of sort of cool war machines, to put a little thing about the effects of war was the purpose of it. So the context was part of the piece, and I just think it's really interesting what you were talking about earlier about putting things in the street because you're changing the context.
I think that was the part about going. You have to explore a piece to get something out of it. I think that's an important aspect in some way. It doesn't have to be like too obvious.
Yeah. I mean, I think the joy of any piece is the interaction between the viewer and the piece itself. If a piece speaks to you, if you find that little detail that gives it sort of an emotional kick, or even I guess an in joke or whatever, it just adds that little extra, doesn't it?
It does, and I think it involves you in the piece in some way. Like it relates to your own life, and I think, of course, a baby trolley and bullet casings is something that hits me because I'm a parent. So it reflects back on me in some way.
Yeah. I mean, I remember seeing it, and I remember enjoying the piece because it was so different. It was like finally someone's doing something novel in this category. But obviously, it doesn't have the same impact for me because I'm not a parent. I can't imagine what that's like.
Yeah, it's frightening, of course.
Yeah, there's not many models that give you that sort of a deep emotional connection, one that you can feel is very personal.
And I think the diorama stuff can maybe do that in some way because it's representational of the world you live in, and I think if it would show like a modern environment like 2020s or something, it would be even more so, I think, because it's immediately recognizable as your own world in a way.
Yeah. I think there's almost, well, maybe not a resistance to it, but I think there are very few people who do modeling of in the modern era. There's a lot of historical stuff, and probably because the categories are called that. I blame the model shows all over again. They call it historical, so people go, it's got to be old to count. But there's very little, and it's mostly from what I've seen anyway. It's like street scenes. People who build copies of buildings. There's a lot of that around. But again, like, I'm not sure whether that technically qualifies as modern.
But there are a few models out there. I think MiniArt is making some, and I bought a set, I think, called Campus Friends from Tamiya, with just people in contemporary dress. I think 1/24 scale or something.
That's huge.
Yeah. I'm just super nearsighted, so the bigger the better.
Yeah.
I prefer my miniatures large, but I like those figures because they look something that you could meet on the street. There's a girl with a backpack, and the piece I did called Path of Least Resistance, with a guy walking down a slope.
He was from that set.
Yeah,
I was wondering where he was from.
and he just looked like this business person, and he looks very determined, and I really like that. I feel like that's a person I've seen somewhere.
Defining what makes something original is like I think that's a difficult question for any art. I think. I mean, you do your obvious, I've never seen it before, ergo it's original. But it's not necessarily even original. I mean, it's like you get a lot of pieces where, the sculptor has come up with this new piece and, and obviously it's new and technically original, but it's very much like this is just an old-tired trope. Anyone can do that. They create a piece and they call it whatever, name it after one of the 7 deadly sins and go, look at my philosophical depth, and you're like, no, it's all been done.
Yeah, I think it's hard, and I think it's very individual what kind of originality you're after. I think you can be original in respect to your own work or in respect to the entire miniatures scene, and those are two different animals. And I think different people feel different needs to work with those things.
Yeah, that's very true. I think defining it in terms of personal originality and originality within the wider context is probably that's probably actually quite important, because I think people aren't going to necessarily want to be original within the whole context of the hobby. They could be considered dangerous or embarrassing if they get it wrong.
Yeah.
But they want to be original for themselves.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone goes into a model and goes, I'm going to paint this exactly the way someone else did, except as maybe an exercise in learning something. I think most people would be happy to imagine that all their work is pretty original.
Yeah. Yeah, and you could just go full avant-garde and I'll make something that is original in the scene of contemporary art, and I'll do it making miniatures.
Yeah.
I'd like to see it anyway.
Yeah, you'll get someone doing performance art with miniatures, like writing around in paint with some little green army men.
Well, the challenge is to make something interesting and worthwhile, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. I was going to say, I'm not sure the miniature scene would want to accept that or acknowledge that as part of the hobby.
So, but there's the question of what is restraining you from trying to be original, because I think there's a lot of painters who are just doing the same thing, and that's fine, I think, if that's what you want. But I think there are some people who want to try and be original, but they're not really succeeding in some way, and maybe there's some restraint or a feeling of vulnerability that keeps people from trying out new stuff, because that's essentially what you have to do. You have to try out something that you haven't seen before.
I mean, I think people they're comfortable doing what they know. People like to paint stuff that's in the Warhammer universes. They like to paint soldiers from World War II. They like to indulge in their knowledge of history or whatever. Yeah. So I think a lot of it is just comfort, that they're comfortable doing it and they enjoy doing that, and that's fine. I think that, however, bleeds over into not necessarily considering opportunities for originality even within that, because some people do very original and interesting things without breaking out of those comfort zones. They still can do really interesting stuff. So I think there's maybe more that we could see modelers doing to kind of encourage that, to do kind of fantastically novel things in 40K, for instance.
Yeah, I think I remember doing baby steps in a way, because I wanted to push myself into doing stuff that I didn't feel entirely comfortable with, and of course, if you take baby steps and you do just one little thing, and you will kind of feel comfortable about it, and then you make the next piece and you'll try pushing it a bit further, doing something more abstract, or doing whatever, painting monochrome color schemes or something, just to do something entirely different. And I think you will get there in some way. You will tune your mind to seeking it out, and but you'll have to accept the feeling of risk that comes with it in some way, and I think that's because it's something that's real. I think it was for me anyway, because it feels strange to do something that you're not seeing other people doing. Yeah. So how do you overcome that?
Yeah. Well, I think part of that, the scene is actually getting not getting great at it, but it's improving in the terms of acceptance of that. So, for instance, the model shows that they've now got the storytelling categories, which is now broadly speaking, this is where you put your weirdly creative stuff and storytelling stuff and all of that ambience. And I think there's a group of people around that who are very willing to engage with people who are being experimental and trying new things, and are very willing to sort of talk about it. And rather than I know I have friends who look at some of my stuff and they enjoy painting, but they don't understand what I'm doing, and they just look at it, don't really engage, and go, I don't get it, and then move on. So I think having a group of people who don't do that, who do go, I want to know what this is about. I want to engage with it. I want to, see what I get out of it. Maybe I want to learn some new trick or, an idea. I want to get a nudge in a direction from this. So I think some of the shows are doing quite good work. Well, I don't know if you'd say the shows are doing it, but the communities at these shows are getting much more engaged with that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, so, I think just in the short time that I've been doing miniature painting, I think I've seen stuff generally move in a more artistic direction, or there's like an undercurrent of it anyway.
Yeah.
And I think that's very interesting to me.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think there's still there are still boundaries. I think that boundaries of comfort that people will still find difficult to step past in terms of getting more creative and more, abstract, I suppose. I mean, I had an idea for a project that I don't think the hobby is ready for. It's extraordinarily narrative, multimedia kind of experience thing. But I'd also have to learn how to code, which would kind of suck. But So I've kind of put that on the back burner, partially because I'd have to learn how to code, and partially because I don't think I think if I took that to a model show, people would be like, "Oh, well, that's just a bunch of gimmicks stuck together." It's rather than sort of necessarily being prepared for something that's kind of an advanced narrative sort of construct.
I think it sounds interesting.
I mean, I woke up at 4 a.m. one day and had to get up, and Christina, my wife, was like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I have to make notes."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can do that kind of things when you don't have children.
I have a question for you both. You can sort of push the limits of what a miniature is, like you're talking about. But is there a point? Well, at what point does it stop being a miniature and become something else? Wow. What point are we talking about making art rather than making miniature art?
I mean, I'd say the standard characteristics of miniature art is it features something that is a shrunk version of something else. I mean, as long as you've got that in there, and it's not, I guess, being used as a playing piece by full-size characters, then it's still miniature art, I would say. I mean, I think there's a whole spectrum of arts, and it's like asking, when did Picasso's stuff stop being painting and start being collage? There's a whole series of artworks he did, which are arguably both. And I mean, you could do the same thing for miniature art.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm generally not into like definitions of stuff. Like, when is it a miniature? I don't know if it's even an interesting question. Not to to be rude or anything, but yeah, if it provides some kind of experience for the viewer, I think it's justified. and I
I mean,
don't need the discussion if it's art or if it's not.
Yeah.
I just want to talk about how I experience this thing or what kind of emotions it's bringing forth in me. I think that's the more interesting question. But
I mean,
yeah,
I think it's at least partially necessary to be able to define miniature art as distinct, if only because we have model shows. And it's what can you or can't you take? As you know, I mean, I prefer you could just take everything, but then it stops being a model show.
yeah. But it's when you started talking about definitions that I feel limited, and I think there's like this contrarian thing that sticks its head out, and I want to paint like just a normal sized small thing and put it on a plinth, and it'll look like a miniature, even if it's just a a pill on a plinth or something.
Yeah. I mean, strictly speaking, one of my bagworms, a piece I did a few years ago, one of my bagworms was technically a magnature. It was about 5 times life size.
Yeah.
And I still entered that in a model show.
Yeah, but you put a miniature city on it, so it's...
well, that was only one of them. There were 4 of them, and one of them was 5 times life size.
Yeah, that's bagworm. Right. The first one,
the others were smaller.
The twigs on the back.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not that big in real life.
Yeah, so I guess the argument there would be that it's about models, it's not about miniatures.
So and a model could be any scale. It's a miniature is anything on a small plinth.
Well, I mean, it doesn't need to have a plinth.
No.
As aircraft modelers. Plinths?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the concept of not putting stuff on plinths is kind of interesting in a way.
It's terrifying. If you go to a model show, it's terrifying because you know someone's going to have to handle it, judges or whoever, at the very least judges, and you've got to get it to the model show intact. But I think in sort of broader terms, you ignore model shows, then I think plinths give things a kind of gravitas that they may not necessarily deserve.
It's like a frame on a bad models. I think.
Yeah,
it has that function like a frame on a picture.
Yeah.
And it kind of it frames the piece, of course, but it also kind of restrains it in this frame, so it's not really in the world with you. It's in its own world.
I mean, frames work particularly well for that because it creates that window effect as well.
Yeah,
where you can sort of open that out inside.
And some distance to the viewer, I think, in a way.
Yeah.
You can feel safe from art on a plinth because it's up there in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I do all of my plinths in black. I have for years now, and this is because in my head, it's easy to delete that bit, and so you can kind of just pretend it's a floating scene, and it leaves room for your brain to build out the rest of it. Whereas you get these people who use these beautiful pieces of wood, stunning, polished, and all of that. I find it much harder to erase that from the thing.
Definitely.
And to me, that makes it look more like it's an object rather than a representation of a world or a story or whatever.
Yeah, I agree completely. It's disturbing in a way, not like it's frightening, but it's like a disturbance in the visual scene that you're creating to the aesthetic of the piece in a way. It's harder to subtract, and it has wood grain has a scale to it, like it's a real thing, and just a black plinth is something that has no scale in a way. It's kind of erased, so I agree completely with that. But I think it could be interesting to do other stuff. I saw a piece at an art museum this summer that was like a big, it was like a human-sized sculpture of a house in stainless steel, and it was very reflecting. And I thought, can we have like a chrome plinth or something? How can I? You can, but it'll probably look horrible. But it's like my brain.
I mean, I've seen concrete plinths, which are they're quite. They're very heavy.
Yeah.
They weigh a ton. But no, they can be really effective. I really like them when they're used well. I mean, I think it's the kind of, if you're going to go away from a basic black plinth, I think the plinth needs to engage with the scene that's attached to, really. I mean, that's kind of the way I would think about it. Yeah.
Do you think putting things on plinths is part of the compulsion miniaturists and modelers have to give something status like art?
I think it's definitely for giving things status. I mean, I remember when I started going to Golden Demon when I first came to Britain, and all these people had their models on little tiny plinths, and I was like, they look amazing. I want to do that with all my models. And and it was because it looked more important when you put it on a plinth.
It does look amazing too, and it feels satisfying to put a piece on a plinth and it looks finished. So I can totally understand, and I use plinths myself. It's not like I'm against plinths or anything, but I think it's interesting to consider the option of not using one. Like it becomes something to take into consideration in your piece, because you're thinking about, what am I trying to do with this, and a plinth could play the part of that, or it could hinder what you're trying to say. So I just think you have to be conscious of that in some way.
Yeah.
And the plinth is part of the composition too, and it has this elevating quality to it. Like if you put something on a plinth, it kind of looks like a monument or something. And do you really want that? I think it's worth thinking about.
The plinth also defines the dimensions of your composition. It puts some kind of limit on that, which is why you get people, rummaging around boxes of plinths at shows trying to find exactly the right dimensions. When I did my chairs, I made all of the plinths, every single one of them, all 19, and they're all different. Because I wanted to be able to control that composition. I wanted to go, so some of them are very strangely shaped, they're trapezoidal, or, there's one that's extremely long and thin and very tall. And because it would force me to try something new with the composition, to go, how can I make this narrative work with this scene? Or conversely, I have this scene I want to create. What are the proportions of the plinth that I need to do this? And how can I keep it as clean and clear as possible? Because I didn't want to clutter it, as we discussed earlier. Yeah. So I think, in that regard, if you approach the plinth as an extension of the work itself, even a black plinth, I think can be kind of an integral part, more than just, this is something to hold and, to look pretty. I think this is probably the most in-depth discussion of plinths that has ever happened in the hobby.
The most philosophical one, anyway.
Yeah.
What about if you made them dangerous or unpleasant to hold or look at?
Oh, I'm sure I've seen that before. I'm sure I saw someone made one out of rubber, and it was like that wet look rubber. So it did look grotesque. I can't remember where I saw that.
Yeah, but that would kind of steal the scene from your miniature in a way. Of the plinth shouldn't get in the way, but it could maybe have a function.
It would have to be part of the overall theme of the piece, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
At that point, is it a plinth or is it just the model?
It could be a plinth and a handle. I thought about doing this is just a stupid idea, but I'm going to tell you about it anyway. Like doing like a handle, and then you had like a miniature on top, and you would be looking into a wall and in a gallery where there was a picture on the wall, and the picture would be a hole through the backdrop, and then you would, if you look at stuff through it, it would become art in this picture frame. So you can carry this around at the model show, and you could say, "Oh, this is art now." Almost
like a not a kaleidoscope, I guess, but
an Instagram filter or something.
Yeah. Yeah, I had an idea for an interactive plinth many years ago. I painted a bust of Vladimir Putin in drag makeup. But what I'd originally wanted to do was have him just done in grayscale and have layers of filters that you could slot in front of it, to build the makeup as you go along. And unfortunately, the physics and all of that, and just the drama of trying to figure out how this would all work without people just snapping bits off instantly, got the better of me. And I was like, fuck it, I'll just paint the makeup on them instead. But I think that kind of interactivity is a fun idea. Because we always say models, don't touch.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think maybe we could find some sort of more interactive approach.
Like a convention of the miniature hobby is that you paint everything, and can you challenge that in some way? Can stuff not be painted? Of course, there's the sculpting part of any miniature show, and there's these model kits with where they are unpainted, and I kind of find that fascinating in a way. And
I mean, because for figure painters, the thing you're always trying to control or trying to represent is how light interacts with this supposed surface. And so you want to paint it because that's the only way to control the light, because otherwise it reflects like plastic or whatever. And I mean, occasionally you see people use, sort of natural materials or whatever that they don't paint. Chris Clayton several years ago did it, or I'd say it's probably 15 years ago now. I'm old. But he built and painted an Inquisitor, large-scale Inquisitor for Golden Demon once. I think it was Inquisitor, a Sister Battle or something. And she had a fur ruff, I think it was. Or was it the hair? Might have been the hair. But the hair was natural fiber. I think it was the hair. It was natural fibers that he didn't paint at all. And he took this to Golden Demon, and I think he might have got a silver or something with it. But everyone looked at it and went, it just looks like a doll. It looks like a doll. And I think there's an aversion to that because you don't have that control over the light. And because we see things like hair and go, it's a doll. That's not a miniature. So I think it's probably just,
Yeah, I was thinking in the context of contemporary art, of course, but you have a lot of meaning packed into the material of any piece that you look at. And this is just crazy talk because I have no answers to these questions myself, but I can't help contemplate what if you made a miniature out of cheese or something. Would that carry any meaning or send a message in a way? And of course, the material could be anything.
Yeah. Eric Swinson painted a wax figure as a candle at Monte San Savino last year and had it lit and melted. Yeah, which was it's a fun, amusing piece that he put a lot of effort into for a one-off thing.
Did it burn all the way down, or did someone save it?
I think it burnt most of the way down. I think they had to stop at a certain point because the arms were resin. I think they hadn't fallen off, I don't think, or maybe they wanted to save it so the arms stayed attached to the molten figure. Yeah. But yeah, it was.
I thought that was an interesting thing as well. Yeah. Especially with Eric Swinson's work. That seems he's just really perfectly painted stuff, and you just light it on fire. I think that's.
He did an interview with Roman about it, or Roman interviewed him about it, and he said that he made it as a. That people keep looking for deeper meanings in models, and sometimes it's just a model, and he just wanted something that by the end of the show wouldn't be a model anymore.
Yeah.
And Roman pointed out that was in fact a deeper meaning.
Yeah.
It was pretty amusing. To go back to your, could you make a model out of cheese? I think you need to find the right material. And possibly invent new ways of casting or sculpting. Because I mean, you could sculpt cheese, I guess, depending on the cheese. But like concrete might be an interesting one. Or
there's all sorts of things, and those material carry meaning in a way, like your painting can do. Yeah, I got to think of it because I just made a cardboard box out of cardboard, and then I painted it to look like a cardboard box, and I kind of felt stupid about it.
I remember my mother asking me when I was a kid and I was painting terrain for wargaming, and I made these piles of rocks out of rocks and then painted them black and dry brushed them grey. And she was like, "Why are you painting them?" And I'm like, "Because they don't look like rocks." Which is, again, it's ridiculous, isn't it? It's
yeah. But the painting thing is about control in a way. You have to control the aesthetics of the piece, and you can do that by painting it. You can make you can control the focus or the color or whatever you want.
Yeah. I mean, you can do less painting. I think there's the there's the modelers who use wood to make planks, and then they just stain them lightly and then sand them back a bit. And so a lot of the original wood is still visible, and they've just added some weathering effectively. So I mean, I think there's people who do that. And I think we probably could do more.
Yeah,
probably. It's an interesting idea. I might have to give that a go sometime.
just
I'll
have to
steal it.
find a meaningful material to work with.
Yeah. So is this part of your usual creative process? This thing, you're halfway through it and you go, "Ooh, look at that."
Yeah, I think everything is up for debate in the most of the process, actually.
Yeah.
Um,
What's your favorite part of the process?
Yeah, I don't know actually. I think starting the process is always best, and then finishing is the worst. Yeah, but I think there's some merit to each part of it. It's always fun to just try and make up stuff and have some ideas and play with those by just making drawings stuff, and then you get a feeling for it. Then there's the obstacle of you having to build it or sculpt it, and I have some ideas that I really want to crack on with, but sculpting is holding me back because I just can't be bothered to do it. Yeah, but I think the building part, I like building stuff out of just cardboard and styrene sheets and stuff like that. That's very satisfying in a way. I don't know if it's intellectually interesting or something, but it's a satisfying part of the process that you have to decide on scale and composition and stuff like that. It's like a crossword puzzle or Sudoku or something.
Yeah.
I think it can be very satisfying if it's not fighting you too much.
Yeah. No, I've been building scratch building robots recently, entirely from just raw plastic card and rod and whatnot.
Yeah.
And it's very much like you say, like it's kind of, like I start and I have the idea, and that's a brilliant idea, and then I have to figure out how to make it work.
Yeah.
And that's annoying as hell.
Yeah.
Because how does this robot's joint work? And then I start building it once I figured it out, and that's great because you're kind of getting part from the original idea to building the actual idea, and having gone through the annoying bit. And next I'll have to paint them, and that will just annoy the hell out of me again.
Yeah. Okay.
Because I don't like painting machines.
Yeah, I kind of like painting, or I do like painting very much, actually. I'd like to just be able to materialize my projects out of thin air and then paint them. That would be perfect, I think.
Yeah. I enjoy scratch building a lot more than I thought I would. I didn't do a lot of it until the last couple of years, I guess, when I've had to build stuff because otherwise it doesn't happen. And it's a bit of a learning curve because I don't watch YouTube videos really, and that's apparently where everyone learns to do this stuff. And I'm like, I don't want to watch a 2-hour video of this, but I've sort of had to self-teach. I think things people know.
I think that's probably a good approach to being kind of original too. Is like teach yourself to do it because you'll have your own take on it. And I haven't taken any painting classes really for that reason, because I want to kind of protect my own way of doing it in a way.
I've never taken any painting classes, not because I'm trying to protect my own way of doing things, but because my objective for painting isn't usually what the painter is teaching. I could take a class to do NMM, but I don't care enough about NMM.
No. I think if there was like a more philosophical painting class, that would be fine. But
I think that's called the pub. That's going to the pub after a model show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll have to go to more model shows then.
Yeah. I think, in fact, I think pubs at model show or bars at model shows, that might be my favorite part of the creative process. I think you go there, you've got your models down, you're done, you've picked up any trophies or not, and then you can go and have a beer and recover because you've put all this creative work in and all of the energy of going to the show and being forced to socialize and pretend to be clever, and then you can just have a beer. Yeah.
I think you have to pretend to be clever, Fred. I think you're a pretty clever guy.
It's all a ruse.
Yeah. Fake it till you make it.
Yep.
No, you have to. I think Salvador Dali said something like you had to behave like a genius to be one. So you'll just have to.
That certainly sounds like him, yeah.
Yeah.
So you do lots of really creative work with color, much more than I do. I tend to paint things. I'm kind of stuck in this broadly realistic paint job sort of thing. I find it very difficult to sort of just go, oh, you know what, neon pink. But you do lots of that. Really interesting stuff. It's one of the reasons I really like your work. Is that planned in advance to some degree, or is it much more freeform, just evolves while you're painting?
Yeah, it is pretty intuitive, but there's some pre-planning to it. I think the cardboard box I just painted was planted. It's the color scheme of Donald Trump. It's orange and
I hadn't
beige.
picked up on that.
But I think that's about it. I have it. It's more like an intuitive thing that I have like a sense of the environment I want to create, and I just start with some very very bright colors usually, and then tone it down in different ways. But I think I think miniature painting is really complicated in a way, and I can make it make sense if I have a very limited palette. It makes more sense for me to mix colors than it does to buy different shades of red and then work from those. So I think I don't actually use black in my painting most of the time. I usually mix dark tones from others. So I think that gives a lot of vibrancy to my painting. And it just gets too complicated if I have too many pre-mixed paints. And I think I have a kind of a non-traditional approach to painting. It's kind of more like watercolor, and I use a very transparent paint over very bright underpainting. And I don't know where that came from. I think when I was just really getting into it and learning I watched two artists on YouTube, and one was Marco Frisoni,
Oh, yeah.
whom I really like, and the other was James Gurney.
Oh, yeah.
Who does a lot of. He has a lot of watercolor and gouache painting videos on YouTube, and I remember watching a lot of those. And I think that's kind of mixed into my painting style in a way.
Yeah.
So a lot of transparent washes and stuff, and underpainting.
That's interesting.
But it's very intuitive, and and it feels kind of unique in a way. I haven't seen anyone else do it, but I think I had to make up a system that I can use to represent something in a way that looks real. So,
and then you throw some neon pink at it.
You can. Watercolor painting is that you have a very bright background and you paint transparent paint over it. And why can't that be like a neon pink background anyway? So.
I tried doing something similar with one of my recent projects, the flowers pieces, where it's all they've all got moody grey skies in the background, but they're all painted over very very bright colours, which sort of peeks through it. Points, which I was hoping would peek through a bit more, but it was a fun experiment.
And that's something I use a lot, underpainting in different bright colors, and you can have it peek through, but you have to use transparent paints to achieve it. I use a lot of zinc white for highlights because it's a more transparent white, so it lets stuff shine through more. And then I'm very conscious of not using. I only use very opaque paints where I need stuff to be opaque. Otherwise, I prefer transparent paints.
Okay.
Yeah,
Interesting.
that's my
Yeah.
own made
I
up
find
choice.
I use thicker paints as I get older,
Mm,
and more opaque because I don't
yeah.
have time to. And on 1/72 doing translucent layers would just be,
Mm,
oh god, I dread to think how long that would
yeah.
take, and it would all just be muddy and horrible.
Yeah,
Um,
I couldn't be bothered. I bought
yeah.
some cadmium yellow and orange because
Mm.
if you want the opacity, you have to go that way,
Yeah.
and it works very well.
Yeah.
I think very vibrant colors too, and then you can shade it down afterwards.
Mm. Yeah.
And I just like a system where I can, if I buy artist paints, I know what
Mm.
pigment is in them, and I can see if it's transparent or not, and I can see if on the label if it's a mix of different colors, and because I know those pigments, I will know how the paint will behave,
Yeah.
and that makes it more something that I can understand and manipulate to do what I wanted to do. Um,
It's
yeah,
almost like you went to art school.
I didn't. Yeah, I did, of course, but I didn't learn
Yeah.
any practical things about painting there. It's something that I
Oh,
picked up after I
oh,
started
okay.
miniature painting, actually.
Hmm.
And I need to understand the material that I'm working with. So I I did kind of a deep dive into what a paint actually is and what different pigments are there and how do they behave. Because I couldn't live with not knowing.
Yeah.
All right. Well, guys, this has been a really interesting conversation, and I want to thank you both for taking part and joining me tonight. And I hope listeners have got a lot out of it. And please do write to. I'll put a link up for both of your socials in the
Hmm?
episode description, and I hope people get in touch with any questions they have and comments they have for you. But I'm gonna have to listen to this 5 or 6 times and unpack it. So it's a good job I get to edit it.
Yeah.
And thank you both very much.
Cheers.
Thank you.
While I was listening to Mikkel and Fett, when we were recording, my mind was buzzing. So many ideas and tangents. It's given me a huge amount to think on and a lot of ideas to explore, and it's opened my eyes to areas of the hobby and how it can be different. I'd love to hear what you guys think, though, so please do go to the Model Philosopher Facebook page, the Model Philosophers Lounge Facebook group, or email me on info@insidethearmour.com. Here are some of your comments from the previous episode with Tracy Hancock. Regular listener and good friend of the show, Ramon Lamelli, said, "Another excellent show. Tracy Hancock is a Zen master, and I could listen to him all day. Thanks for the inspiration, both of you." Devon Poor, a good friend of Tracy and I, said, "Just listen today. Great discussion. Good to hear your voices again." Chris McLean responded to a comment of John Bryant's in the Model Philosophers Lounge Facebook group regarding the episode with Matt McDougall on politics and modelling. Chris wrote, "I appreciate John Bryant's point of view from his feedback on episode 20 at the end of this one. I agree that if one holds the view that politics is not off limits in modelling, then religion should not be either. In fact, it's more out of my religious convictions than merely political ones that I avoid certain historical and contemporary subjects and am leaning more into fictional genres." Perhaps John's comment struck a chord in part because a friend gave me a small figure of Christ praying in the Garden of Gethsemane just this week, so I've been reflecting on how to approach an explicitly religious subject. Previously, most of my reflection on religion in modelling has been about how immoral activity is represented, including things like war crimes, as well as your classic cringe-inducing German soldiers peeping on women bathing diorama. But there are innumerable opportunities to utilise the medium of modelling in positive ways, or at least with reverence, as I'm sure the piece Chris Meddings mentioned from a recent SMC did. Somewhat related, as I listened to this episode, I also realised that at least part of my answer to the question of why we enjoy making small things is also related to my faith. As a Christian, I believe all people are endowed with the image of God, and one aspect of image bearing is that humans are sub-creators. We are wired to create in all sorts of ways, and in our hobby, we express our capacity as sub-creators in a very direct way, shaping, posing, and storytelling. Not to be crass, but are we playing God in our miniature model worlds? And with both religion and political subjects in particular, we ought to think carefully about what our work tells others about its creator. I think I agree with Chris, as I said previously, that I think modelers have a responsibility for the message they project. This was a big theme of the episode on politics, and I think it applies to all subjects and all things we express through our modelling. It's not good enough just to say that it wasn't something we intended. We have to make sure that the message we project is clear, and it is our responsibility when we're making models and showing them to other people, essentially communicating, to make sure we're communicating clearly. I don't think I agree with the idea that modelling is about creating miniature worlds as a sort of sub-creator. For me, it's at least not about that. But the thing about modelling is that it's very different for everyone, not just what we make, but how we look at making it and why we make it. And it's always super interesting to me to hear other people's thoughts on it. This show has always been intended as a conversation, a space for ideas, and I love getting yours, listeners. I want to thank everyone for taking the time to comment, and you, dear listener, for making it this far. Please support the show by rating it on your podcast app of choice and by telling others about it. You can also become a patron at patreon.com/themodelphilosopher. Your support is greatly appreciated and really helps with putting the show together, and a special thank you to all the current patrons for all your support so far. Until next time, take care and thank you for listening.